Isle of Palms is one of the most sought-after islands in South Carolina for short-term rentals because it draws an insane amount of tourism, and there is no cap on short-term rentals as of now. In fact, it is the only beach town in all of Charleston that is actually viable for short-term rentals. But let me explain. There are some things that you should know before you purchase an STR here. And being someone who owns 4 short-term rentals myself, with 2 of them right here in Charleston, I know how they work. So let's dive right in. I usually like to describe the short-term rental market of Charleston, South Carolina in 3 categories. The first category is that historic downtown market within the short-term rental overlay. Because of heavy restrictions on which properties are viable for this rental strategy, the prices of these homes tends to start around $1.5 million and cap around $4 to $5 million. You'll find just as many duplexes and triplexes in this area as you will find single-family homes. Your guest avatar tends to be luxury vacationers who want to stay in the historic parts of Charleston. They may or may not have a vehicle. Inventory here is limited, and because of municipal law, the homes tend to be priced very high. This is the most desirable area of Charleston, and because of that, you're not going to find a single short-term rental eligible property that performs at better than a 6 to 7% cap rate, and many homes are much less than that 6 or 7 cap. The next market we have in Charleston is the suburbs. These properties tend to all be single-family homes throughout the Charleston area, especially in cities like North Charleston, Goose Creek, Hanahan, Somerville, and Latson. Remember, almost 1 million people live in the Charleston metro, and folks visit for all sorts of reasons. In the suburbs, your guest avatar tends to be that discount vacationer, traveling construction crews, and insurance claim housing, to name a few. Municipal law is all over the place here, so some areas don't actually allow short-term rentals at all or heavily regulate them. I actually made a really long video a few years ago that go through each of the suburbs, but laws have since changed, so please reach out to me if this is where you want to invest. In the suburbs, you can usually meet your cash-on-cash return metrics, and it's not unheard of to operate at a 10 or a 12 cap, which leaves our final market for short-term rentals in the Charleston area, and the reason for this video, that is the beach markets. Charleston has 3 main beaches in the area: Folly Beach, Sullivan's Island Beach, and Isle of Palms. Folly Beach recently passed very restrictive STR laws that cap short-term rentals at 800 permits. Ironically, when they did this, property values dropped by about 20% across the board, and that's pretty important to note. We'll come back to it. Sullivan's Island has banned short-term rentals since the early 2000s, even before Airbnb or Vrbo really took off, so it's pretty much always been a no-go for the strategy, which leaves us with Isle of Palms. Now, back in 2023, they voted on a similar law that Folly Beach passed, one that would cap the short-term rental permits. However, Isle of Palms residents and property owners voted it down. They learned their lesson from Folly Beach. Sanity and property rights prevailed. So let's dive into what it takes to own and operate an STR on Isle of Palms. To start, I think it would be best to talk about the rules concerning short-term rentals that do exist, what documents you need, and how much the fees are. Make sure you pay attention because some of these rules are similar to other STR markets across the country, but other rules are much more strict. To summarize the Isle of Palms code, they define a short-term rental as the use of any dwelling, including the lot upon which the dwelling is located, made available by the owner to another person for a term of 3 months or less. So the Isle of Palms is different from other short-term rental markets across the Charleston area like Folly Island or Charleston itself because the term is 90 days instead of 30 days or less. So technically, you could have a guest rent your property for most of the summer and it would still qualify as a short-term rental, which has pretty significant implications with respect to occupancy taxes and tenants' rights. Essentially, you get the worst of both worlds here, but you'll find it's not really that big of a deal. However, property owners that rent residential units for any length of time are required to obtain a business license from the city website. This document requires owners of short-term rentals to understand code requirements, complete a fire safety form, and complete the Isle of Palms rental revenue document. This provides an end-of-year rental revenue statement from all property managers' booking sites used during the year. The rental revenue document provides that end-of-year revenue statement from each individual home, and it should be noted that this is gross rental income, not net income. This is important because business license fees are based on the gross income generated by the rental during the previous year. The fees start at $450 for the first $2,000 earned in gross income, an additional $4.60 for each additional $1,000 earned. So the more gross income your property makes, the higher your license fee the following year will be. For example, if your property earns around $50,000, you can expect to pay $675 in fees. But if your property earns $125,000, you can expect to pay around $997 in fees. So for $75,000 more in gross income, you're only paying $322 more in fees. Business license must be renewed every year by April 30th to remain active. And like I said before, there is no cap on the amount of STR license on Isle of Palms because back in 2023, voters on the island rejected a cap, so it's still possible to obtain them. Now let's talk about occupancy limits. Overnight occupancy limits on Isle of Palms depend heavily on when the property was licensed and whether it's been remodeled or rebuilt. The cutoff date is June 22nd, 2010, when the city tightened its short-term rental rules. If the home had a valid STR license before June 22nd, 2010, and it's been maintained without interruption, it falls under the more flexible grandfathered rules. That means the max number of overnight guests is whichever is greater of the following: 2 people per bedroom plus 2 extra, 1 person per 250 square feet of heated space, or a minimum of 6 people. Homes licensed after that date don't get the square footage rule and are limited to whichever is fewer, 2 people per bedroom plus 2, and it still has a minimum of 6. For new construction homes or newer construction homes that were built after June 22nd, 2010, the limit is capped at the lower of either 2 people per bedroom plus 2 or 12 people total. Now, if a home is remodeled or rebuilt after that date, it depends on the pre-renovation occupancy. If the home could accommodate less than 12 guests, you may increase it, but only up to 12 based on those same formulas, whether it's grandfathered or not. If the occupancy was already 12 or more, you cannot increase it even with added bedrooms. And if the license is grandfathered in, you get the additional square footage exception. Now, if the model reduces bedroom and square footage, the occupancy must decrease accordingly as well. These are all important considerations when it comes to purchasing a short-term rental on IOP that you cannot overlook. If the home has a short-term rental license that was established before 2010 and was grandfathered into the old law, it's likely worth more. On the flip side, if the property was remodeled and for whatever reason the previous owners had a wall taken out for an upstairs loft, then the number of guests that can stay overnight is going to be reduced. Short-term rentals on Isle of Palms have a maximum occupancy rules as well. The total number of people in their residence cannot exceed twice the overnight occupancy or 40 people, whichever is less. It should be noted that children under the age of 2 are not included in determining the maximum number of guests. These rules help give you some peace of mind, ensuring that no crazy parties are happening at the property. But it throws a hitch in your guest plans if they're trying to host like a wedding reception or a family reunion at the property. You might get hit with that occupancy requirement. Because Isle of Palms has a mix of residential and short-term rental properties, parking and vehicle allotments are strictly enforced, and I mean strictly. The island only has so much usable land for parking, and this is very annoying for residents who live on the island. No one likes going to park in their driveway and some random car is blocking the only entrance or exit. Each short-term rental is required to provide at least 1 off-street parking space per bedroom or 1 vehicle for every 2.5 people allowed under the maximum occupancy. So if you purchase a rental property that has 4 bedrooms, then you need to have at least 4 off-street parking spaces at the home. There doesn't seem to be any rules regarding the number of vehicles allowed at the property during the day as long as city laws are followed, but parking rules get more specific between the hours of 11 p.m. and 9 a.m. I'm sure that this is to help combat large parties and too many vehicles parked at one home, and trust me when I say they are aggressive about enforcing this. IOP has full-time code enforcement and neighbor complaints are investigated very quickly. Your guests can have 1 car per bedroom or 1 car for every 2.5 people allowed under the maximum overnight occupancy. Additionally, property owners are required to have a minimum of 2 parking spaces for guests, and the parking spaces at the property must be on a surface driveway. So unpaved areas like grass or sand do not qualify, so take note of that. But what if your property doesn't have enough off-street parking? Well, you can actually purchase up to 4 on-street parking permits from the IOP Police Department on an annual basis. They only cost $15 a permit per year and allow your guests to park in the public rights-of-way within the residential parking district from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Another important rule for short-term rentals on IOP is clearly posting the required notices both inside and outside the home. This is pretty standard if you already own STRs in other markets, but in case you don't, the inside notice comes from the city and informs guests of local rules and needs to be posted within 15 feet of the main entrance. The outside notice covers the city's noise ordinance and needs to be posted in a weatherproofed way on any porch, deck, patio, or pool area. Basically any place that guests would hang out so that they can see it. These outdoor rules say that quiet hours start after 10 p.m. to help minimize disturbances in residential neighborhoods. And yes, it's illegal to cover up, move, or remove the signs, so make sure your guests know that too. Something unique about STRs in Isle of Palms is that if you're renting out a single-family home, the rental must be offered in its entirety. This means owners cannot offer private rooms or shared rooms within a single-family home. So if you had this idea that you wanted to go purchase a property to live in and rent out a room to help with some additional income, this is not going to be allowed as it violates the single-family zoning codes of the city. Additionally, you are required to provide the city with an emergency phone number numbers so that you can be contacted, and the owner's representative must be able to be on site within 1 hour, which is, again, pretty common with STRs across the country. Another important thing to consider for your short-term rental property is that if it's going to be your primary legal residence, because if it's not, you're going to be subjected to the higher county tax rate of 6% instead of 4%. Now that we've talked about taxes, let's talk about flood zones on Isle of Palms. Take a look at this map. The area outlined in red is IOP. The light blue color on the map represents flood zone AE or VE, which means there's a 1% chance of flooding occurring in any given year and a 26% chance of flooding over a 30-year mortgage. Now, the difference between flood zone VE and AE is they're very similar, and you're going to have to require flood insurance for both of them, but VE is flooding with the potential for wave action, whereas flood zone AE is no wave action, it's just a rising body of water. So what you see is flood zone VE is going to be closer to the coast, closer to the beaches, maybe a block in, but flood zone AE can be all across the island. You will need to have flood insurance if you purchase a property in this zone. Now, the orange spots on the map represent flood zone X, and then the uncolored portion represents no flood zone. And both of those areas indicate an area of moderate to low flood risk, and you're not required to own flood insurance if your property is in this zone. So as you can see from the map, the majority of Isle of Palms is within flood zone AE or VE, with a section throughout the middle that is orange. Homes on Isle of Palms that are in flood zone X can be more expensive because they're not required to hold a flood insurance policy, and if they choose to carry a policy, it can be cheaper than homes in the light blue areas, aka flood zone AE or VE. Now, flood zones are just one of the many pricing factors on IOP, but it's an important cost to consider because it will affect your bottom line. Again, if you need help navigating these maps and different pricing factors, I'd love to help you out. Now, let's briefly talk about the different zones on Isle of Palms where short-term rentals are allowed. Now, take a look at this map. All the zones that are tan, gold, or light green without cross-hatching are zones that allow for short-term rentals. The tan and gold zones are SR1 and SR2, which stands for single-family residential 1 and 2. The light green area of this map that doesn't have that cross-hatching is the planned development called Wild Dunes. This is a gated resort community on the north side of IOP with its own zoning overlay, and it's one of the most common areas for STRs on the island. But it's important to note that HOA rules inside of Wild Dunes still apply on top of the city rules. The areas that are red, pink, and purple are the general commercial districts. These are typically reserved for commercial lodging and are not zoned for STRs. So as you can see, a lot of the island can be used for short-term rentals, but how much do the homes on Isle of Palms cost? I used sales data from the past 12 months at the time I created this video to give you the most accurate prices I could. For single-family homes, the median sales price was just over $1.8 million with a median square footage of 2,500 square feet. And these homes had an average of 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. For townhomes and condos, the median sales price was $610,000 with a median square footage of just 490 square feet and featured 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, if that. So Isle of Palms is an incredible island with a great location if you're wanting to purchase a short-term rental property. It's arguably the best island in Charleston for STRs. It's a mix of tourism and residential living, makes it a fun place of vacation as one of the most unique islands around Charleston. The island pretty much sells itself. If you have any questions about short-term rentals on IOP or throughout the Charleston area, don't hesitate to reach out. As a local real estate investor myself, I have properties all over the Charleston metro. I know what it takes to navigate these different markets. I would love to earn your business and be a resource for real estate as one of the top real estate teams here in Charleston. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.